The following presentation, Trade Effects on Happiness in Asia, was held by Alexander Hess. On the conference, Korea, the Iron Silk Road and the Belt and Road Initiative, Soft Power and Hard Power Approaches. The conference discusses an urgent and deep processing topic. How can middle powers like South Korea and Germany benefit from closer economic and political linkages across the Eurasian landmass, in particular the Belt and Road Initiative, dominated by China? Should they rather jump on the bandwagon, or should they follow distinct own initiatives, either in their region or interregionally?
The title of my presentation, the title of the paper, is Trade Effects on Happiness in Asia, an empirical investigation, or of our paper, to be more precise. But it is a little bit misleading, since it would actually have been called Trade Effects on Life Satisfaction in Asia. Why that is, we will soon figure out. But before that, let me briefly show you a photo of my co-author. This is Dr. Christoph Hindermann. And since he couldn't be here as he had to work, I figured it would make him happy if I show you at least his face in the form of the photo. Anyways, and actually he is the expert in econometrics and statistics, so the statistical analysis was mainly done by him, and I still consider myself a rookie, and I learned a lot from him. So let's get into this. Now, as we have discussed quite often in this conference, like the Belt and Road Initiative is as each and every one of us knows, is a gigantic endeavor, and it is probably only there to stay. And in a study from 2020, you et al. Constructed a, let's say, new bilateral revealed trade preference index, so it's called, to measure the bilateral trade preferentially between China and its, to that time, 114 trading partners. And they found, according to their index, that bilateral trade between China and the Belt and Road countries has grown 8% faster than it has that with the non-Belt and Road countries. Now, I know already that there are quite some opposing views or attitudes towards the BRI, and as Professor Pasha already mentioned, the tensions are increasing. And only time will tell whether or not it will benefit the participating countries more than it might hurt them, or if it might pull them into debt and make them dependent, let's say, on the benevolence of the Chinese government. However, we right now don't really want to take part in the debate, as a disclaimer, yet we take a step back and try to take a sober look at these developments in international trade and analyze their potential effects and impacts on the happiness, subjective well-being, or life satisfaction within Asia. Now, I will briefly discuss some concepts of this field that I'm researching in, that I'm doing my PhD in, and then I will go into why trade might affect life satisfaction, to be more precise, and then I will show you the data we used and the model, and present to you the results and discuss them with you. As a spoiler, these results are quite sobering. They will not be something super new to you. At the end, I will draw some concluding remarks and show you some avenues of further research. Now, happiness. Well, one could argue it is a rather vague concept and broad concept. There is an extensive literature about what it really is and how it should be achieved. I mean, scholars from several scientific disciplines, be it philosophy, sociology, psychology, or political science, and even economics, have grappled with defining it. Now, in the most recent years, especially positive psychologists suggested the use of the term happiness to communicate rather with the public, since it's quite a fancy term that draws a lot of attention to it, but lacks clarity for a scientific concept, which is actually why I used it still in the title, because it's just much more fancy than subjective well-being. And but they preferred, as I said, the use of the term subjective well-being, which together with objective well-being is part of the general umbrella term well-being. And just as a side note, GDP, for example, is a known, or let's see, appears to be an influence of objective well-being in that sense. And now research on subjective well-being has gained massive interest among scholars from various disciplines, and publications have skyrocketed over the last decades. Dina et al. In a paper from 2018, they refer to subjective well-being as something to the various types, that refers to the various types of subjective evaluations of one's life, including both cognitive evaluations and affective feelings. Now, there are different dimensions of subjective well-being, and we will look only into one of these dimensions, although they are interrelated. The first one is experienced well-being, which goes into the momentary feelings of pleasure and joy, such as we experience during this conference. And it has two components, like the presence of positive effects, like I mentioned, joy and pleasure, and the absence of negative effects, which are not totally the opposite, which is why I mentioned both. The second dimension is the cognitive or well-being dimension that we mostly focus on, that is more like a long-term perspective on life and how satisfied are you with your life. And in the third dimension, which is recently getting more popular again, of course, it goes back to Aristotle's theories, eudaimonic well-being, and it goes into the purpose or the meaningfulness that one experiences with his life. Now, as I mentioned, we go into the second dimension and check whether it has any, it was affected by trade in Asia. Now, let me just show you there are various measurement methods to capture well-being, or in our sense, in our case, again, life satisfaction. And there are self-reported measures and other measures. And let me just turn on the laser pointer. Beneath these, the one that I put in bold, large-scale surveys, is probably the most established one that provides enough data to compare international countries, and a lot of focus of the research is given to its reliability and validity. But in the coming future, big data analyses might actually be even better for that. But nowadays, still, most researchers use large-scale surveys, and so did we. Now let me go into why maybe trade might affect life satisfaction. So the theoretical basis lies within the freedom of choice theory, which basically states that the larger the set of opportunities or alternatives, the larger the freedom of choice, and hence if people have an intrinsic value to freedom of choice, they should be more satisfied with it. Now, Verme 2009 introduced 4 attitudes that one could have towards such an opportunity set. The first one is the number of available choices is irrelevant as long as the opportunity set includes the choice that provides the maximum of satisfaction, or in terms of economic terms, utility. And the second attitude that one can have is a larger number of choices is always better for anyone, and the degree of satisfaction should be equal for everyone. The third one is slightly different. The degree of satisfaction varies, but is always positive with a larger opportunity set. And the last but not least, a larger opportunity set can either be negatively or positively appreciated. Now, we tested the hypothesis that an increase in international trade and the associated increase in freedom of choice should eventually lead to increases in subjective well-being, more precisely life satisfaction. Let's see what the data says. So now I go into the data that we used. So as the dependent variable, we used life satisfaction stemming from the data stems from the World Value Survey, where life satisfaction is assessed on a 10-point scale by means of the following question. All in all, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole nowadays? Like 1 means completely dissatisfied and 10 means completely satisfied. And the main variables of our interest, we used 2 of them. We divided trade into trade volumes. The data stems from the World Bank, and trade freedom. The data stems from the Economic Freedom Index of the World from the Fraser Institute. And we also introduced a couple of control variables that are, let's say, known influence of subjective well-being as well of well-being in general, either positively or negatively. So for the first two, these are variables of wealth. So we use GDP per capita, as you would probably have guessed from also the data from the World Bank, and the Human Development Index. And since GDP, or more precisely GMP, goes into the Human Development Index as a third of it, and the other two dimensions are education and health, we also introduced it as a control variable, as in one of our specifications at least, for wealth. And last but not least, we used the unemployment rate. Also, the data stems from the World Bank. As you might guess, the unemployment rate should probably be negatively correlated with life satisfaction. Now let's have a brief look onto our model. We used a fixed effects panel model within Estimator. My colleague, co-author, would probably be able to tell you much more about it. We worked both on it. I'm just as you can see, life satisfaction on the left side of the equation, and then we have, depending on the specification of the model we use, the trait variable of volume or freedom, and depending on the specification, similar, we have an indicator of wealth, which is either GDP or the HDI, and at last the unemployment. Now let's see what the results show. So this is a table out of our paper, and each of these numbers that you can see on the top in parentheses, they represent a specification of the model presented before, where we stepwise added explanatory and control variables. And as you can also see, all significant values are highlighted in bold. We find no evidence that changes in trade volume or trade freedom significantly affects life satisfaction in Asia. And in all model specifications, we find both indicators of wealth, GDP per capita, and HDI to be positively correlated with subjective well-being. And last, in at least two model specifications, we find both indicators of wealth, GDP per capita, and the HDI to be positively correlated with subjective well-being. But we have to mention that this R square, the coefficient of determination illustrates that only 15 to 19% of the left side of our equation, or we could say dependent variable, is explained or can be explained by the independent variables, or more precisely, the right side of our equation. Now let's discuss these results. So we find no direct effect of trade on life satisfaction in Asia. That doesn't mean that such an effect doesn't exist, and it also doesn't mean that trade doesn't have an indirect effect on life satisfaction, since some studies find trade to be correlated with economic growth, and it might in this way affect subjective well-being. Now, but might there still be a possibility that there is a direct effect of trade through the freedom of choice on life satisfaction? Well, we have faced some limitations. The amount of data was very limited. To give you one example, we couldn't even use the first wave of the World Value Survey, as there were no Asian countries covered. And in the second wave, there were like 6 countries covered, which is of course not enough for a statistical analysis. But later waves, at least especially the last 2, they covered more than 20 countries. Now, it might also be the case that life satisfaction has risen, but only for specific subgroups of the population, whereas other subgroups of the population might have experienced a decrease of life satisfaction. One could imagine that someone who with a high income benefits more of a greater opportunity set, whereas someone with lower incomes gets actually more dissatisfied, as he compares them to other people and sees all the products or things that he can't afford now. It might also be the case that life satisfaction might have risen, but only for a short amount of time, since there is this adaptation and set point theory in combination, which suggests that life satisfaction or subjective well-being or happiness, how you want to call it, only oscillates around a innate set point, which is inborn and it could go up, but only short term, and then eventually comes back to its initial set point. And if we go into traits, right, trade effects on life satisfaction might occur, but maybe with a time lag. And maybe it's just too early to say if these developments in trade have a direct effect, as they will take some time to trickle through to the general population. And last but not least, maybe the trade effects are just too small to really show in the life satisfaction data. Now, let's give you some avenues of further research. I could still say that the Belt and Road Initiative is still in its early stages, and the Belt and Road Initiative, or the trade, let's say just trade in Asia, didn't affect the subjective well-being directly, but the Belt and Road Initiative might, however, either positively or negatively affect life satisfaction in other ways. Now, as avenues for further research, I recommend that one uses or supplements our analysis with an individual level analysis or a multi-level analysis. As I mentioned before, one could also split trade flows into imports and exports and see if there are different effects between the two that maybe cancel each other out. Use life satisfaction data from other large-scale surveys like the Gallup World Poll and also compare the results. And at the end, using a multi-method approach, as I introduced different measurement methods to capture subjective well-being, could further increase the validity and reliability of our results. And at the end, assess trade effect impacts on different subjective well-being dimensions. As I said, we only tested for the life satisfaction, evaluative well-being dimension. And I try to be quick and fast, and we'll end it here, and I'm happy to hear your comments or your questions. Thank you very much for letting me speak to you.